Sharon saved her supply chain from cyber risk and ended the office goat debate.
Okay, so it's the two biggest economies in the world locked in a trade war. That's essentially what we're dealing with, right? And China did up their tariff on U.S. goods to 125%. U.S. did raise tariffs on China to 145%. So that's where we stand for what it's worth, and it's worth a lot. Two nations traded $585 billion in goods last year alone. Though we got more from China, they got from us, as the president points out all the time. He's trying to make that good, so to speak. He's trying to take aim at the trade deficit, which peaked during his first term. As a matter of fact, there it is. The question now, what are companies going to do about all of this? How will they adjust? Will they reroute their supply chains to avoid the tariffs? Will they invest in production here in the United States, as the president wants them to do? Do they go to other countries that don't have to pay as high of a rate? Or do they cancel orders and just bring trade to a halt? Let's bring Kit Conklin in on this. He's the Senior Vice President of Risk and Compliance at Exiger, which is a supply chain AI company, so they deal with this kind of thing all the time. He was at one point also a senior advisor to the House Select Committee on China, so you know it from the business side, you know it from the political side. So I wanted to kind of spend a few minutes talking about, not debating what the rates are going to be. At some point it becomes irrelevant, but what the reaction is going to be. So a couple things here on the tablet, which I have here. We'll project this onto the screen. Shifting U.S. supply chains. So, this map is, a lot of these do, they look at, how things go back and forth, what other countries might be in play. But the part I'll ask you about is this: tariffs accelerating shifting supply chains. True, and how? What do companies do?
Tariffs are shifting supply chains. The question is, how much are they going to shift between now and when the policy inevitably changes? What we're starting to see is suppliers that make quicker to market goods, like textiles, they're
Right.
more agile. Whereas car companies, aerospace companies, aluminum companies, that's going to take years before those supply chains can shift.
All right, let's look at the numbers then. Again, back here I have the top 5 imports and exports. This is going from last year's numbers. U.S. to China, you got soybeans, aircraft, integrated circuits, pharmaceuticals, we just talked about, petroleum. And then China going the other way around. Of course, phones and laptops are going to be top of the list. So then you start to think about loopholes, right? So we have it here, and you see the 3 words identified. Nearshoring, where you outsource to a nearby country. Offshoring, which we know about, unfortunately, for years in this country. Or onshoring. So because of the uncertainty, what's the most likely kind of way to play a loophole if it exists?
You're starting to see companies do more friendshoring or nearshoring because some of those investments have already been made over the last several years. What's going to take more time is to onshore all of that capability domestically within the United States. For example, Representative Harshberger made a great comment earlier about pharmaceutical APIs and the reliance that the U.S. has on PRC pharmaceuticals. Those supply chains are regulated, they are complex, and it's going to take a long time before that starts coming back home. We can get pieces of it certainly quicker, but it takes time.
So that's a lot of this, right, the time. And then the other thing is, like, what's realistic and what's not. So, for example, Dan Ives, the noted technology analyst, was on our show, I guess, when this first blew up, and he said that if you had to make an iPhone here in the U.S., it would cost $3,500. So it's, oh boy. So that's not happening, right? So, but what is happening? What actually, is it pharmaceuticals? What's a realistic target in terms of what we could change here, even if we don't go all the way on some of these products?
I think you're starting to see a huge policy shift to make sure that pharmaceuticals and APIs and medicines and medical devices are coming back to the United States, or at least to the West. That over-reliance has been exposed. The National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology came out with a congressional report earlier this week that outlined some of those policy recommendations. And so we're starting to see some real movement on that. President Trump, Vice President Vance have mentioned that consistently. So this has been a White House talking point for several days now. And so we're starting to hear more and more funds being moved around congressional budgets to start bringing that capability back. I think you're going to start to see a bit of a pause, though, on some of the other kind of consumer goods.
Yeah.
Those supply chains aren't from a policy perspective and a national security perspective, they're not quite as important as for example, pharmaceuticals are.
Okay, final thing. What about chips? So again, we have this path of a semiconductor on the map here. How it works. So to me, these are semiconductors, which are computer chips. Generally speaking, are important for a lot of different reasons. Some of it's geopolitical, since a lot of it's made in Taiwan, and the relationship between China and Taiwan. So what is the kind of the near, intermediate, long-term future of chips or semiconductors?
So we're starting to see some of those exemptions, right, for chips, but there's now policy talk to add those chips back on to their own specific tariff rate.
Yeah.
And so I think the policy hasn't yet been determined on what these are going to look like. I do think, though, that some of the recent comments earlier today by Chairman Xi Jinping in China, as well as the Ministry of Commerce, about not responding tit for tat for U.S. tariff increases.
They said they're basically done with the tariffs for now, but they have other things they could do. But go ahead.
That's right. So I think we're in a bit of a détente, and I think chips are a very unique example of how that détente may play out over the next year or so. Chip fabs take years to develop, right? And so it's going to be a bit before those are established domestically.
Real quick before you go, you feel any better? I mean, I know that's a kind of an elementary question, but do you feel any better about things today than you did a few days ago? Or
I think the Beijing has given the Trump administration an off-ramp. They've said that they're not going to keep going tit for tat. So over the weekend, things can calm down a little bit, and I think we'll start to see negotiation really ramp up in the next week or two.
We'll take that. That's the way things have been going, right? Thanks, Kit. Good stuff again. He knows a lot about this stuff with China and the business and the politics. Okay, Special Envoy.